My name is Quinn Wilson. I'm going to be a teacher. Life is messy. We try to plan it, but so much of it happens without our conscious intent. We try to understand it, but we usually need hindsight for that. But with that hindsight, themes do emerge. It's one of the reasons why I want to teach history, to pull those constants from the inconstant mess, and to share them. Part detective, part storyteller. Neither is an easy job, but when it comes together, it's just magical. The past year has been more of an inconsistent mess than most, but the theme of this story was actually an easy one to pull once I identified it, because it's been so critical. Relationships.
Personal growth is never really personal. Not truly. I thought it was. I grew up in a Western culture that values individualism, and I don't mind that. I value independence, both as an idea and a lifestyle. But those solitary moments are never the ones that shape me the most, even though I've long been under the impression that they were. I want to tell you about how I got here. I mean, here, like spending all day teaching classes, unpaid, on the Olympic Peninsula, where while I share a story with a professor who I've never physically met for a class I've never physically attended, and not questioning that idea in the slightest. Well, that's not true. Not right now. There are many times along the way where I ask myself if I was insane, but I promise this is where I want to be.
I lived in Montana. Very rural Montana. I was an archery coach. I was treated well by my employer and given a lot of freedom, and I got paid to play outside in the mountains all day and even brush shoulders with some very influential people. I was paid enough that I could spend the off-season traveling the world and having these very cool experiences. But I knew I couldn't do it forever. I don't know how I knew, which bothers me because I'm all about making decisions based on logical reasoning. But there was something deep down that knew that the thing I was going to do in a real long-term way had to be something that filled me. So I took a walk. For 6 months, I walked the Pacific Crest Trail through the Mojave Desert and the Cascade Mountains and the Sierra Nevadas for 2,650 miles from Mexico to Canada. It was my ultimate journey of self-discovery. I thought that by visiting the deepest mountains, the most solitary places in the country, that I could strip my thoughts bare and in the core would be answers. And I did find those answers, actually. But it wasn't the mountains that told me. You see, I wasn't the only person on that trail. On that journey, I met people through pure coincidence. People on the same mission, going the same way, who just happened to walk at about the same pace. Most of the day I was alone, but I'd stop for water or pitch my shelter for the night, and there they'd be. And the solitude? That was real. There is something about the mountains that strips you bare after you've pushed yourself to physical limits you never knew you had. But so is the person standing next to you, admiring that same view 50 miles from the nearest road, record snow year, no trail in sight. And it was that connection. That is where I really learned about myself and what matters. You may have heard of Chris McCandless. They made a book and a movie about his story, Into the Wild. He's a guy who gave up on the world and went to Alaska to live off the land. Made it 4 months before he starved to death. One of the last things he did before he died was highlight a passage in a book. Happiness is only real when shared. Anyway, I walked out of those mountains knowing I wanted to teach. That it was worth the time and expensive grad school, and that it's something that would give me what I need as a whole person. I didn't even fully realize at the time that the relationships were the why.
So, here I am, putting up with this while taking classes and student teaching. And I thought I wanted to teach because I love history, and the work is meaningful, and that's still very much true. But I didn't realize just how much the interpersonal side of things would keep coming into play. Whenever I was asked to share my student teaching successes, The stories were always about how I connected with a student or a little sign that showed I was developing trust. When I got a kid who was failing every one of his classes to raise his hand and share an idea unprompted. When I commented on the margin doodles of a student's assignment and the next day she stayed a few minutes after the bell to show me some of her illustrations. When I had to film a class for my EdTPA certification paperwork and the entire class, even the most disengaged students, brought their A game, because they thought I'd get hired if they helped me look good on camera. Or when school finally reopened and I got to start teaching in person, and how my favorite part of that transition were those little informal moments between the moments where you get to make real connections with people. Earlier this semester, I read Dependent Rational Animals by Alistair MacIntyre, about how Western philosophy underplays the universal nature of vulnerability and our dependence on each other, and how much our social nature is a part of human evolution. In fact, most intelligent animals are highly social. The two are almost always linked. And that wasn't even on my radar as an idea, but it made a lot of sense, and it even cleared up a lot in hindsight, like where I found the most value when I travel and hike and teach. Really, most of the speech here is just an application of those ideas.
It seems so obvious now when I pull out that concept. Relationships, connections. It's so clear to trace it back, so central. But it didn't really come to me until just 2 weeks ago, when 2 of my classmates came out to the peninsula from Seattle. Just a simple visit, just hanging out. Something that would have already happened dozens of times at this point in any other school year. But to see someone outside of our organized, scheduled Zoom meetings, someone who, like on that hike, I've grown with, been pushed forward by. We've all collectively lost so much over this past year. Some in a direct, literal way, some 3 million deaths later. I wasn't one of those people, thankfully. Living in the fairly rural Olympic Mountains even meant my school opened earlier than most of my peers and saved me the pain of having to student teach remotely for longer than I did. But even among those who stayed healthy, it's been a year of doing without. That sort of thing shows you what's important. And this it's one of those things. Connections are the thing I lost this year, but they're also the things that got me through it. My mentor teacher, who supported me after I just bombed over and over and over again during my first remote teaching days because the kids were so thoroughly broken that it was almost impossible not to, even if I had known what I was doing. The professors who shuffled their curriculum around to add in time to just talk to each other because conditions made it so hard to have those moments naturally. My friends who called me after class just to get that bit of non-academic time in when it still wasn't enough.
I sound like a starved puppy, but I'm an introvert. Loneliness is something I've gone out of my way to seek out on many occasions, but ultimately, relationships are what make us human. They're what make our choices matter. And introvert or not, if I'm going to make a meaningful, positive difference in this world, relationships are what I'm going to make it with. My name is Quinn Wilson, and I'm going to be a teacher.